Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. We got a big one for you guys today. No shit. Cannabis cultivators, cannabis aficionados, fasten your seatbelts. We are in for a ride. I got goosebumps already just starting this conversation. Get your notebooks. There is so much precious information. We are going to have to watch this one multiple times just to absorb all the knowledge that is coming our way. I have been preparing and waiting for this opportunity to sit down with this legend for some time now. When I joined this project, interviewing all these international legends from the cannabis industry, his name was the first on my list. Uh, I have so much respect for his life's work. For me, he's a beacon of inspiration. He started experiencing the cannabis trade market when he was 11 years old in New England. And believe me, it was rough. He's here to talk about it. He was brought up living through experiences that most of us could not handle. So hang on. He's one of the most well-known growers in Humboldt County, and he's internationally respected cannabis expert. He is responsible for building and improving the modern cannabis movement as we know today. He's fascinated by the research for rare, desirable traits in ganja. And he does an amazing work traveling the world hunting for landrace genetics. And he just got back from Pakistan, where he traveled through the original Silk Route. How sick is that? He's going to tell us all about it. He's the founder of Port Royal, owner of Wonderland Nursery, and he's the co-founder of the Ganjier Project, certifying future cannabis entrepreneurs, working alongside with Swami Nikati, Derek Gilman, and with the French late Canoli. May he rest in peace. We miss you so much, Frenchy. He was the cultivation director for the Humboldt Patient and Resource Center. He was an instructor for the Humboldt Cannabis College, besides having the unique experience of growing for decades, running his own operations. He also offers consulting services for the broader community. Seriously, not to blow smoke up your bum, Kev, but I can think of anybody that knows more about all these facets of this cannabis industry as you do. He's spoken at university, spreading his knowledge. He's a judge at the Emerald Cup and consulted on cannabis-related educational shows for A&E and Nat Geo. He's at the epicenter of the Green Hush and graces the walls of Oakland Museum. He's now guiding the industry as it transitions to the clean rush, the sustainable movement of regenerating land and soil naturally through cannabis cultivation. And this is one of the topics we are going to go deep into. So without further ado, I have the utmost pleasure to welcome to our show Mr. Kevin Jodrey. Thank you so much, Kevin, for your time. Uh, it's a blast, man. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure for me too. No matter how many years I spend in the industry, it's always amazing that people want to engage with you. And I think it's the gift of being in cannabis that you get to have these beautiful global relationships. So thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, man. It's our pleasure. We have so much to explore and talk about. You're a pool of technical information and knowledge that it's amazing. Kevin, of course, we're going to talk about cannabis cultivation, the market, hash, genetics. your project to bring back to life the original skunk and all the land race projects you are currently working on.
Great.
But I would like for you to tell us first a little bit about yourself, your early years as a teenager in Rhode Island, and all the shit you had to went through that eventually built your character and the respected human being, father, family man, and professional you are today. I find it is very relevant for the rest of our talk. If we could start there.
Sure. I was born and raised in Rhode Island, a state in New England next to Massachusetts. And the region I was in was basically a fishing village. And the economy had gotten smashed. And so you just started to see the change from people doing, conventional, what we call normal work, into things that were less legal. And at that time, drugs were coming in from freighters, and they would come into the bay, and the fishermen would go out to sea and get the products and bring them back into town. And it's funny, I always say I was lucky that I got to experience it, because it gave me this really interesting background. It let me see what the world was producing. So it let me see Colombian from Colombia, Panama from Panama. It let me see a hash from origin. So I got to see Lebanese and Moroccan and Afghani hash and real Thai. And so this would have been like 78. So from 78 to 83, those 5 years were this incredible foundation that just really gave me this incredible perspective of the diversity of cannabis. And because the neighborhood was so criminal, it let me see it at a larger than normal level. Usually kids don't get to see this much product. And for me, it was fortunate. And my family was in organized crime. My cousin Ralph that I was raised with was one of the architects of the bonded vault robbery. So the bonded vault robbery was, it still is in terms of if we inflation adjust it, it would be worth about 140 million today. But at that time, it was around 35 million. So it was a $35 million robbery in the 70s. And what? My cousin Ralph ended up catching the case for it and wouldn't snitch, and ended up with a 200-year sentence.
Fuck.
And so I had this very different perspective of the world just from where, my view. And the cannabis was something I was just absolutely fascinated with. I mean, the first time I smoked it, it connected to me. And so I had this, I would say, an unnatural obsession with it. But it wasn't just so much of the consumption. It was just such a curiosity, because when you get to see product from source and you're able to actually, be identified as that source, you're able to say, hey, this is from this group. Usually when we come through the batches, there'll be an exceptional one. When the exceptional batch comes in, we'll drive over your house and let you know, because this is pre-cell phone era. This is when you still had a phone in your house, rotary dial phones.
Yeah.
And so it allowed me to be able to be exposed, and the people that I was dealing with, the older people in the neighborhood, they were good to me. And it allowed me to have this really excellent education. And I was having, home problems, domestic issues. So your home life is kind of fucked up, for lack of a better word. And the street kind of becomes your home. And yeah. I allowed it to become my classroom too. So I allowed it to give me an education, and I was all in, right? And so in 83, I start probably cultivating in 80 outdoor. And then 83, I get hit, and I get dragged out of high school in handcuffs by the drug task force. And I always laugh, because I was about to eat lunch in high school, and I ate dinner in training school. Like that was the speed of the legal system. And you're missing lunch, but you're eating dinner in the joint. And so I spent 11th grade incarcerated. And that wasn't actually a traumatic experience.
How old were you? Sorry.
Oh, I would have been about 15, 16 at the time, 1983. And so it was, and it wasn't traumatic. It was just a really good education on what incarceration is, which is you're forced to be under control, and the people who run incarceration facilities are basically sociopaths to me, and just like most law enforcement are. And so it just gave me a really good indicator of like, whoa, this will be my future if I'm not careful. And I get out of training school, I go back to high school, I graduate, and the world is changing in New England. By 83, you started to see the change from cannabis coming from other countries into no cannabis coming into the U.S. The U.S. drug war had really lit up in 80. 83, it was fully engaged, which is where I get grabbed. But we no longer had cannabis coming in from other countries to anywhere near the same degree. I mean, it was almost like an instant rarity. And it was the beginning of the United States domestic industry. And so products started coming in from Pennsylvania. I remember the first product coming in that we would call green weed. And the funny thing was the price went from like 70 an ounce of the really killer Colombian gold to 200 an ounce for this new green. And we were all in shock, but all of a sudden, you're consuming fresh green cannabis grown indoor. And it was this just revelation of like, whoa, what is this product? And it was also different plants. And so in order to cultivate indoor, you had to really have a different type of variety. So it was really my first true introduction to broadleaf on a steady level. So we would have stuff that we would call Afghani come in, and I would take seeds from that and grow them. So, I can remember the morphology. And so it was, Afghani, Pakistani cannabis, but it was still from outdoor production. To see it indoor, to see it fresh like that, to catch the aromas of fresh cannabis was, for the first time in your life, it was absolutely shocking. And the product was incredible. But we were also seeing the change in what was coming over from the other countries, and that started to become cocaine. And so the cocaine started pouring into the region, and I started seeing changes in what we were doing and the level of crime and the level of violence and the issues. And I realized that I was about to probably spend the rest of my life in prison like my cousin. And I wasn't wrong. Most of my friends that I left in New England, a good portion of them, I'd say 60, 70% of my true people I hung out with either ended up getting killed or killing someone or having a drug overdose or suicide, or just, we call it life on the installment plan, where you're in and out of prison for the rest of your life. Basically, you're just constantly in and out. And so I saw the writing on the wall. I really did. And I just was like, man, this isn't what I want to do. And I said, maybe I made the wrong choice. Maybe cannabis is, maybe this isn't a future, because I was associating cannabis with drugs, because at that time, cannabis was considered worse than heroin. And which was the irony, because in my family, I'm surrounded by career criminals, but in their opinion, I was like the dirtiest of all of them because I was involved with pot. And it's funny because armed robbers, kidnappers, and murderers were like, whoa, of all things, why pot? And and I laugh because the U.S. did such an incredible job with the paint job on weed. I mean, they did the war on the war on drugs was extensive, and it permeated into every country in the world pretty much. There's nothing like the war on drugs as a propaganda campaign.
It became a standard everywhere. Everybody copied. Europe.
Everybody copied it. Well, we forced them. We forced them to copy it, with economic and with military and just in general, bullshit.
Influence that you have on the whole world. It's obviously it was going to go that way, and it still does today. Still does.
Yeah. Oh, completely. There's no question. It's still that influential, and in some cases it's positive influence, but in this particular case, it was definitely not positive influence. It was an agenda. And it was an agenda and we understand why now. They wanted to wipe out hemp, and they did a good job. And then they started to realize that if they could utilize cannabis as a cash cow, they could create privatized prisons. they could create these incredible income streams, and the prisons are investable, and the products that are created at the prisons get sold to the federal government. So at the end of the day, there was this massive industry created off the backs of the victims of the drug war. And it's still to this day why it's not being fully cleansed, because there's just too much money being made on the backs of people who are involved in consuming product. So I saw this happen, and I was just like, man, I didn't know what to do. So I used to go visit my cousin in prison. So I went and visited him in the joint. And I said, hey, you know, I need some advice. What should I do? I see the writing on the wall, Skip. And he was like, hey, you know what you ought to do, Kev? You ought to go in the military for a little while and just get out of the area and maybe develop some new skills so that you can keep your mind occupied. And it was just brilliant advice, because it allowed me to leave the neighborhood and go do something that let me believe I was building a future. So it wasn't like an escape. It was really like a ladder to go develop. And I go into the military, and I ended up going through a dive school and become a diver. And that's where the story takes a weird twist, because, you know, in 85, 86, we're just in the middle of the drug war, and the government is attacking every vessel on the high seas. And I end up becoming, like I always say, I was the finger of the hand of Uncle Sam, because we were getting dropped out of helicopters and boats to go raid drug vessels out in the Pacific.
No shit.
Oh yeah, no, it was crazy. So I go from being a producer seller to now being somebody who's in the military raiding ships on the high seas. And it did two things. The first thing is it let me understand exactly how many people were smoking weed. Because when you see 100 tons of herb in a barge being towed across the ocean, you're just like, wait a minute, how many people are consuming if you can see 100 tons at a time? And so it instantly let me realize that the picture that I was exposed to and what I understood was minuscule compared to the reality. And it was in one of these raids that I was able to be very fortunately introduced to the captain of the ship that was being raided. And he had never been caught, and he didn't get caught this time either. His ship was sterile, but they knew he was a trafficker, and a large one. And when they raid a vessel, they take the crew and they put you in the galley, which is the kitchen. And that way they can contain the crew in the kitchen. And that way, when the military sweeps your vessel looking for the stuff, and there's an armed guard in the kitchen, you know, with gunpoint, you know, guarding the crew. And I had come out of the water from doing the essay on the hull, and I'm still in wetsuit. And I go walk into the galley to sit down, and I realize I'm sitting down next to the crew. And so they strike up a conversation with me, and they're like, hey, we're all divers too. And we were all from the Canadian Navy. And we started having this really interesting dive-based conversation. And then they asked me what my intent was. And I said, you know, when I get out of the military, I want to go work in the oil fields and go do deep water salvage. And I think that's my career choice. And then he asked me, what did you do before you went in the military? And I leaned over and I was like, the same shit you guys did, but at a lot smaller level. And they were cracking up, and they were like, you need to can your dream, because the dream of diving in the oil fields is a deadly one, and it's really very limited. And so at the end of the day, it's not the best choice, Kev. It's a choice you make when you don't feel like you have any opportunity, because you're having to risk your life to make the money. He said, you should go back into what you did before. You should go back into weed. It's the future. And man, it struck me. Yeah, I wish I had a photo of this guy, because I put it on the wall of my house, because those words absolutely lit a fire in me that's never stopped burning. And it was this realization that my fascination with cannabis and my fascination with cultivation and genetics and the history and the culture and just all these things was okay. It gave validity to my dream, because the individual I was speaking to had taken all the normal routes and had made the decision that it was best to be in the world that he was comfortable in. And that's how I felt too, because at the end of the day, I felt far more connected to him and the team that he was with than the team that I was with. we were very different. The military is a very black and white type situation. It's bad guy, good guy. And to me, that's not life. Life is really, you live in the gray. And you can't just take someone's definition of another and apply it as if it was in stone. You have to make these decisions yourself. And so I realized that if this is the future, then I should prepare for it. And so I went, and when we got back into port, I went and bought my first cannabis, like, you know, botany books, but not cannabis, just straight plant science books, so I could better understand how plants grew.
And the physiology and everything.
Yeah, just a general idea, because I realized that if I was going to go into this route, then I needed background so I could better understand.
And guys, when it's a fucking plant. It's a fucking plant.
Yes. And you just start to understand. And so I had to be really careful. This was the peak of the drug war in the military. So everything was unbelievably, they were trying to throw everybody out that was on drugs. And America was making its industry on incarcerating people in drugs. And so I had to be smart about how I played it. But when I got out of the service in '89, the last thing I did in uniform was get the government vehicle, and it went to my first grow shop in Berkeley, California, and bought all my indoor equipment so I could spark up the day I got out of the service.
Awesome.
It was, man. They were dying too, because I walked into the store in full uniform and they were like, "What the hell's going on?" I said, "Oh, I'm getting out of the service." And I said, "And I only have the truck for today." And so I need to pick up some gear so I can spark up. And so I sparked up, and I ended up having this crazy career that went on from, you know, I mean, originally it starts in the late '70s, but I really think that my true beginning of like the modern era is '89. So '78, I get exposed to cannabis. By '80, I'm growing. By '83, I'm incarcerated. '84, I'm out in New England. '89, I get out of the military. And that '89 moment begins really like the new life that I'm living, because I'm in the Bay Area. And so California was cool, and the Bay Area was a really interesting place at the time. There was wealth, but it wasn't as perverted as it is today. So you didn't have the same Silicon Valley wealth. You didn't have the money management wealth to the same degree. So what you had was an extremely diverse, really eclectic region. And I loved the Bay Area of the early '90s. It was incredible. And it was the birth of like California hip hop. So you started having rap music tearing it up, and, you know, Tupac lived down the street from me. I got to hang out with Digital. I didn't know Pac, but I knew Digital Underground. And it was, so yeah, we're all living in Oakland. And so I'm living in Oakland, and Oakland was a city that was just absolutely alive. And cannabis let me have this really interesting relationship there, because I was one of the only white dudes that was really hanging out in Oakland. But the herb opened up a million doors. And it let me meet some beautiful people that I still have really good relationships with to this day. And so it just kind of started this ability to see the world through the lens of cannabis. And what I was doing at the time was I was cultivating, but I wasn't selling herb locally. So the herb that I grew, I didn't sell. I was using it as like social currency, so that I could move through all the social scenes and see the world of the Bay Area and California in a way that really high-end green weed only allowed at that time, because so few people had it. Where I was making the money was I was shipping herb back to New England. And so I had tied in with some Mexican cats, and we started to work together. And what I was able to do was help the Mexican group improve their quality of product, because the product that was being shipped in would vary in quality, and it would really slow down the sales. And so what I was able to do was have the Mexicans come into the U.S. So, I mean, if they can smuggle herb in, they can smuggle themselves in. And so they smuggled themselves in. And we had a meeting in Hayward at my friend's spot. And I was able to bring them samples of flower that I really liked that were coming from Mexico. So this way they were able to say, okay, this is the quality level. This is the visual appearance. This is the scent that we need. And then I showed them samples that, you know, that they had sent over, and they used to ship it over inside these tar containers, like roofing tar. And so they would send over in these big, containers of tar. In the middle of it was the cannabis. But the problem was they weren't packaging it correctly, and the odor would permeate into the product and damage it. So I was able to show them their product that was damaged next to product that wasn't damaged. And then they could clearly see. And I didn't speak Spanish, and they didn't speak English, but my partner Alejandro, he was our translator. He was my connect. And so Alejandro and I and the Mexican team all started to be able to really refine what it was that they needed to do to get us a product that was at a better level. And we did. And so it was,
and everything.
And just selection about what are you sending us? Because if you're sending us herb that looks like this, I can't move it. None of us can move it. So we need better product. And it was just really powerful because it allowed me to start really working with international groups and having an impact in a way that let everyone in the chain get paid. The people in Mexico needed the money. Alejandro needed the money. I needed the money. And so we all needed to have better success. And it was, to me, it was like the beginning of really like consulting, because that was like my first consulting gig, where you're really helping traffickers understand what is the product that needs to land for us to move. And I didn't sell locally because I had no, it's funny, man, you grow up in the crime world as a kid, you have zero trust in people. And I was afraid of being identified as a grower. And then at the time there was no protection. So if you get grabbed with cannabis, a joint's a full-time felony. So I knew that once you have a cultivation location, you're really vulnerable. So I never brought anybody into my personal life, and I never sold any cannabis in that region around me. I just always had incredible cannabis that I would freely smoke and give out when I went to social stuff. And so it allowed there to be an interest in just, communication. We're like, who's the white boy that's got all the good green weed? And what it did is it let me meet a lot of really diverse, interesting people in the Bay that I would never have been able to meet. And I think it radically shaped my view of the world, because when you're white and you're spending 99% of your time with people that are Mexican and Black, and you're having a really good time and you're being treated really well, it allows you to see the world from a very different perspective. And I didn't know anybody that was white that was doing that.
And by that time, have you met, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Azel?
Yes, Azel. Yep, I met Azel. I would have met Azel around like 88 time. And he comes into the place, the military place where I was working as an electrician. Okay. And when I get out of the service, the military asked me if I would come back as a civilian and run the construction team to work alongside Azel, running the electrical team to do lighthouse renovation. So we used to restore lighthouses. And so Azel and I hook up, and Azel ties me in to some really good connections that come up out of Mendocino. And more important, Azel was just a lovely older brother to me. And he, becomes the godfather to my son. And he becomes this really influential figure in many of my friends' lives. Azel had grown up in a place called Chester, Pennsylvania, which is rough. And Azel was he'd come from a tough background. He had been in the military, but he was a brilliant electrician, avionics specialist, and he was a beautiful person. And he had this. It was like my first experiences with One Love, where all humans should love each other regardless of color, regardless of religion. At the end of the day, the only race we're in is the human race. And so Azel he lived that shit absolutely 100%. That was his mantra. And it allowed me to be able to refine my view of the world. He helped kind of polish off some of the edges that come from when you come from New England. You come in from a very, I want to say, determinate group where, my area is probably like, 95% white. So to me, when people talk about, criminals and violence and dangerous people, I don't have other colors in my mind. I have white people in my mind. I grew up with dangerous white people. And so you become very, very white. But I saw the picture in a different way, being able to hang with Azel and get taken into this world. It allowed me to see a culture in America that I really hadn't seen, which was the Black culture. And Oakland is really reflective of many places on the West Coast, where in World War II, there was such a need for workers at the shipyards that the United States brought women and brought people of color into those areas to work in the shipyards. And then once the war was done, they basically said, we don't need women anymore, and we're going to abandon all the minorities. And so every ghetto in California and the West Coast is really connected to a naval shipyard. So Long Beach, Compton area, shipyard, Oakland, shipyard, Hunters Point, shipyard, all of these places. And so what you got to see was these groups of people that had been taken from their homes in the South and brought to fight the war effort, where they're priceless. And then once the war was done, they're worthless. And they end up having to form their own societies because they were abandoned. And Oakland, to me, was like this really refined society of individuals that had been abandoned, and they created their own world. And so for me to be able to be immersed in Oakland, I think did more for me in life than any place else I've ever been, because it allowed me to be treated so well as somebody who obviously was not. They wouldn't say it as a white dude. They was always the Caucasian. They were like, man, who's the Caucasian? Where's that Caucasian? Because I'm the only white guy in a building of 500 brothers, right? They're like, holy shit, what are you doing here? And I'm like, same thing you are, hanging out.
Yeah, and I guess Azel opened some doors in that respect for you.
Tremendous. Yes, because his whole social life was in Oakland primarily, and he and I were really close. We had this beautiful relationship, and so through Azel, I met a tremendous number of his friends, and then through his friends, I met their friends.
He used to wire your grow rooms.
Yeah, Azel used to do. He would do the wiring for the rooms, but Azel was he was into music. His kids were, he had a daughter that beautiful singer. So he did kid groups and stuff, and they would be on the TV shows on Saturday morning and dancing and singing. And it was through Azel's crew that I met this cat named Armani. And Armani was one of the like a cocaine trafficker in Oakland who had caught a case. But it was through him that I met basically like the Oakland music crew, where I started to see all the rappers and all the old East Oakland gangsters. And they were fascinated because I was like the first white person they ever hung out with. So, I mean, it was almost like I was an oddity, because no one had ever really, they couldn't believe I was living in the hood, and they couldn't believe that I was a white dude hanging out. And I wasn't any different than I am right now. It was just, they were just like, holy shit. But it allowed me to see a world that was riveting and so real. And it just really shaped, my whole ability to see the world in a different manner, because at the end of the day, if you behave correctly and you're decent, you end up having an entry into people's lives that is genuine. And at the end of the day, there's a couple sociopaths, psychopaths you got to pay attention to in life. There's always some dangerous cats in the world. But I would say the vast majority of people are really pretty good. And when you treat them with respect and you're not there to take anything from them, you're just there to share life with them, you end up getting like the richest plate of life you could imagine, because you're able to see it from so many different perspectives and have it served to you in so many different styles. So it just was a gift to be able to live there for those years that I did. So for the 5 years I lived in Oakland, that 5-year period in Oakland was red hot. And I ended up going to Humboldt County with Azel in 1992 to do a lighthouse. And I enjoyed the place so much. And I knew of Humboldt, but I didn't, go to Humboldt County to grow weed or get in the weed game. I was already fully in the weed game. I was working for the government, but I was trafficking from Mexico, would come into California, and I would ship it all to the East Coast. And so I would do like one load a month.
91, 92 by then?
That would have been from 89 all the way to 92. Those 3 years there, I was shipping. And so I'm shipping packs to the East Coast. And I probably continued shipping the first like 2 years I was in Humboldt. because the way I would do it is I had a garage I had rented in the Bay. And so I would roll down to the Bay. I'd go hook up with Alejandro. We'd hang out for a night, you know, chill, get fucked up. And I used to drink and party back then, you know, young. And then the next day we would put the deal together, and I would get all the product brought over to the warehouse, and then we would crate it and then get it shipped out. So I only really needed to work 3 days a month to make the, you know, my drug money. And so I could take off on the weekend.
What are you running? Sorry to interrupt you, Kevin.
Oh, that was, well, the genetics I was running at home. And when I was out of town, I'd have my girl run it. But it was, I got lucky that when I got into California, I met this cat named Ralph. And Ralph was dating my neighbor. And so my neighbor, I think her name was Shannon, but Ralph and Shannon hook up, and I start hanging out, you know, and then we're neighbors, so we chat. And Ralph's like, hey, let's smoke. And Ralph had phenomenal weed. And it was funny because it was so California, where when he wasn't around, his mom would water his plants for him. And I thought that shit was hysterical. But he had, you know, some stunning genetics. And I came home one day, and there was a note stuffed under my door, and it said, look at your porch. And I went out on my porch, and there was a trash bag all rolled up, and I unrolled it, and it was a giant branch. And a branch had broken off one of his plants. And so I took that, and that would have been like 89 time. And that's why I learned how to clone. I understood what the branch was for, and I said, oh, I'm going to learn how to clone. And so I plugged it, and I was able to get it to root. And I had and that was really my first experience with like true California skunk, where it was just noxious and foul and acrid and powerful. And oh, Jesus, it just made your eyes bleed, and your mouth was glued together, and, you know, you basically couldn't get out of your chair. And I was just riveted to it. And so I had access to that. So I had clones of that. And then I had tied in with this dealer named Sue. And Sue was my connect for all the high-end shit that I was touching. So she had access to Mendocino and Humboldt, and she had access to all the good hash that was coming out of the area too, in small batch form. And so in one of the bags I grabbed from Sue, there was a couple seeds in one of the buds, and I cracked them, and that gave me my other line. So I had 2 plants I worked with. One was from Ralph out of Alameda. One was from a connect Sue had in Mendo. So I had some stellar cannabis that I was cultivating. And at the time, I was doing it in Rockwool. It was, you know, this is, you know, like late 80s. This is like state of the art shit, right? And you start to spend time around other cultivators, and you start to see the differences in production methodologies. And that's kind of when I got exposed to some of my first, I would say, like biologically driven cultivation on an indoor level through some of the other cultivators I met in Berkeley. And so you start to get this awareness of production methodology and impact. And then the herb coming out of Mendocino and Humboldt County was all outdoor at that time, still small batch outdoor. And the indoor was exploding, but what Sue was bringing me was small batch outdoor. And small batch outdoor just means that at that time, the raids in the Emerald Triangle was so extensive with the helicopters that you had to basically go indoor in order to survive. And so it changed the methodologies tremendously, and people started going into salt fertilizers. You went from biologically built ground, and basically it was holes in the ground. So like when you would go hike a grow at the end of the season, it wouldn't be patches. It would be single plants that were laid out on a trail, so that when they flew it, they couldn't see the whole patch. They'd have to just see a single plant maybe, which would discourage them from dropping down just to wipe a plant. But you would see these holes with a stem the size of a soda can poking out of it. And my buddies that I had hooked up with in Humboldt were showing me, and they said, hey, we've had this hole here for like 5 years. So it's woven into the soil matrix around it, because you're digging a hole in the earth, you're putting in your media, and then you're also biologically amending it, but you're also getting the microorganisms from the native soil to migrate into it. So you start to create this combination system of what you're using to get better growth and what the environment needs to exist and in this collaborative manner.
We are going to talk hopefully extensively about this biological side on the soil. I work with that. I work with mycorrhizae and microbes for soil. So that's when I started researching you 5 years ago, was exactly because I heard an interview. You're talking about regenerative farming and using probio to raise the level of your weed, probio horticulture to raise the quality of your weed. So it was something that for me changed the game.
It did for me too. What you find is, you know, if you're being honest, right? So always I'm a consumer, right? My first love was smoking. I didn't start growing then smoke. I started smoking then started growing. And so when you're being honest as a consumer, you really can steer your development. And so even though I knew the product I was creating in the salt-based environment was at that time was excellent product, it didn't have the same type of high and didn't have the nuances that I was getting from people who were running biological systems. And at the end of the day, they just had better weed. And better weed meant that when you smoked it, you got a better vibe. And I couldn't deny it. And so it started, you know, making me really aware of these organic methodologies. And organic just means natural. We're going to use that phrase, natural methodologies. It's all farming was natural at one point, and we got into the salt-based systems after World War II, pretty much. So salt-based agriculture is a result of too much ammonium nitrate from gunpowder production, and we don't know what to do with it.
Yes.
Yeah, so the military war machine says, hey, we have a byproduct that we an extra product, and we need to monetize it. And so they start to bring this into the world, and lo and behold, it's incredibly effective at what it does. But it also destroys the world we're in because of the mining process, the refining process, and then what it does to the soil application. Yeah, it's a death sentence for living.
Yeah.
So
water fucks with the ocean, fucks with everything.
Yeah, there's no positive end to it.
Having to grow hydroponically on soil.
And in some places in the world, you know, you almost have to use some of it due to input. So in some places in the world where you just don't have the inputs. If you're in a desert island, you have very little input to use, and it's easier to input salt. And so in some cases, it's either, you know, you're biologically driven or you're chemically, but a lot of it is based off of you're going to have food or you're not going to have food. Yep. And so there's a place for everything in the system. It's just that the world tried to put salt-based ag on top of everything. And it was effective. But it got me into understanding biologically driven product as a superior product. But it was tough to do it indoor at any level of scale. And when I got to Humboldt County, because I had a construction background and I had already started assembling genetic collections and I understood indoor pretty well, I started building operations for people. And then I started having I had this epiphany that because I had my hand on so many different operations at the same time, I could start to do like quantitative analysis, and I could start to really figure out what is the combination of factors that give us an end product that we want. And this is all, you know, like early 90s, 92, 93. So the internet is just really beginning at this time. And I didn't know anybody that had, I knew some people that had like a Commodore home computer they used to use to play fly games and shit. But we're talking like antiquity compared to today. And I had never used a computer. But when I was down in the Bay hanging out with my crew, my buddy was involved in stolen goods. And he had an entire garage full of Gateway Pentium computers, the brand new Pentium chip. And he's like, look at this giant garage full of computers. And I said, holy shit. And so I said, like, what do they cost? And he told me the price. And I said, and I realized, wow, there's actually some good money. So I took an entire van load of computers back up to Humboldt. And I went and got, and then when I read the boxes, because I knew I could sell them, and because you're a hustler, right? And so, and I was from Rhode Island, so trafficking and stolen goods and shit was normal to me. And as I got older, all those things went away. But I was still in my 20s, and my New England heritage did not leave quickly. And so, moving stolen goods, like the jacket that fell off the back of the truck, the luggage that fell off the back of the truck, the motorcycles that fell off the back of the truck kind of shit. That was in my birth. I had grown up like that. We were driving stolen cars. We had stolen equipment. My old man was a master thief.
I remember one story you told once that your grandfather yelled the size of tires and type of
on a date. Yeah. And my chick is like, I didn't know you were selling tires. And I said, I'm not. He's telling me what size tires he wants me to go steal tonight when I drop you off. And so it was hysterical because we were raised like that, right? So when I say this to people are in horror and they're looking at me, they're shocked, and I'm like, look, I came from a different place, and I didn't continue with that behavior as I got older. But I still, no matter where you go, once you're in the game, you're a magnet for other people in the game, because for whatever reason, we all feel comfortable around each other because we know that for the vast majority of us, and that's what I noticed in general, is that so many of us came from like broken backgrounds. You don't get your first felony in high school if you come from a normal home. If you're not from, so to me, like Herb is a place that was a beautiful net that caught so many of us that came from like dysfunctional, broken backgrounds, because cannabis was a place where we could find success. And it required balls and ingenuity more than it required background parental support. And in it was pretty nonviolent, and it was pretty gentle, and it was pretty healthy. And so a lot of us were able to use cannabis to kind of build a new life forward. And I think like that's just as a segue, I think that's the issue we have today, is we've taken cannabis and we've corporatized it so heavily that it doesn't catch the people that it used to catch, and nobody in corporate cares. But for people like me, if I didn't have Herb, I don't know where I would have ended up. And so being able to have that situation. But anyways, I'm back in the Bay. I take a van load of computers up to Humboldt, and I go to the bookstore and I go get some magazines because I didn't know how to turn the damn things on. And I got a bunch of magazines about computers, so I could look up the terms that I was reading on the boxes. And I realized that all the boxes had different components. So there was all these different gateways, but they all had different components in them. So I took all these computers apart, and I took all the best shit and put it into one computer, and then reassembled all the other computers and reboxed them, and then sold all those other computers. But now I had like the best computer. And then I went and I took an adult ed class on how to use a computer, and also how to use a spreadsheet. So someone had said to me when I was doing some work and I was trying to do it on pen and paper, someone I met that was in tech said, hey, you should use a spreadsheet for this. And that's really what initiated me to like see the computers at the spot, realize what I needed to do, and then go to school to do it. And I ended up being able to learn how to use a computer so I could use a spreadsheet. And I used that to start isolating variables at all the operations that I was operating. And what it did is it let me go from, at the time, yields were about 1 pound a light. It let me go from 1 pound a light up to almost 2.5 a light, which was a massive jump, massive leap. And it let me leap forward. And
1,000 watts.
What's that?
We're talking about 1,000 watts per
for
volt?
1,000 watts. So at that time, if you got 1 pound of light out of 1,000, you were considered like at level. But to me, as I took a look at the crop density, I said, hey, I don't think this is the limit, and I don't think we're approaching this correctly. But there was no guides on really what to do. And so I started studying commercial agriculture. And as I started to study commercial agriculture, it helped me understand how to really work with all the variables, where we work with environment, lighting, food, genetics, and operator.
No training, no
training.
Nothing.
No, I did this all on my own. This was me just I guess that's, you know, that's my thing, is like, I like to go down the rabbit hole. And
But no plant, no LSD, no scrogging.
No, none of that. None of that. It was purely about how do we maximize the plant's efficiency, and then how do we increase the density. What I needed was, I needed the bare minimum of time on every project. And so I put in efficiency as one of the components, because otherwise there's no way you can actually run as many jobs as I was running, because you're really running around the clock. So like when you're running multiple operations that you're building, remember what I was doing is I was taking homes in neighborhoods, and I mean like regular nice neighborhoods, not hood neighborhoods, nice neighborhoods. So I had to come in, and I would have to bring a vehicle that fit the neighborhood. I'd have to dress to fit the neighborhood. Once I went in the house and I went through the entry door, I had created a box inside. So when you open the entry door, it looked like an entry, but when you shut it, there was another door you had to open that let you into the home. And so you're sparking up all over the place, and you're having to make sure that you're coming in and out of the house matches traffic patterns and neighborhood patterns. And so some homes I had to work at night, some homes I had to work in the morning. And it was one of those times in my life where I basically kind of gave up my personal life for the mission.
Did you have computers to help with the smell?
At the time, no. What we had that's really where, that's one of the issues that really, you know, plagues us today. We didn't have charcoal filters. What we had was, we had the ability to cover scent. What I did different was, I went into the science of ozone. So I noticed that at the garbage plant, the smell coming out of some of the containers was mitigated. And I asked them, I said, how do you guys control the odor? And they said, we use ozone technology. So I got a hold of a company in Texas that made ozone generators. Wow. And the first time I turned it on, I killed all my plants in the room, right? I just wiped them out, because ozone's toxic. Yeah. But I realized that I didn't need to ozone the space. I needed to ozone the exhaust. So I created a plenum that let me inject the ozone into the exhaust. And then I figured out how much length of run I needed for that to actually work, so that when it expelled it. So I was the only one I knew using ozone tech. And it worked incredibly well, because the other technologies at the time were masking agents. And if your house smells like a laundromat, that's kind of an odd odor. You know, so you would have like laundry scent, and there would be 5-gallon barrels of this chemical that you would, you know, as a scent generator, and you'd put these devices over the top of it that just blew this shit out. But I didn't like what it did to the product. It flavored the product. And so you're trying to figure out what to do. And it's really where we started pulling all the odoriferous varieties out of the system. We started taking all the things that had extremely traceable, relatable scents, and I held them in copy because I liked them, and I could use those in operations that were in the rural areas, but you couldn't use them anywhere urban at all. Anywhere suburban, impossible. You couldn't mask that level of volatile sulfurs. And so it was the illegalities that really wiped out so many of these killer populations. But once I cracked the code on how to jump from 1 pound to 2, then from 2 to 2.5, it made me really attractive with other cultivators to build operations for them. And what made it work with the R&D I had done had been done with specific plants. So plants that I had collected that I thought had marketability, that I thought had resistance, that I thought had, you know, really good traits. That's what I had done my research on. So when I built the operations, I realized that the plant had to go along with the operation. And so I started becoming like a small nursery at the same time. And eventually over the years, that's really what I got known for in cannabis, was that I was a nursery operator. And so I was always finding plants that had incredible qualities that are marketability. And then I would do the R&D, and I would be able to create the footprint of how do we get to the place that we want with the plant. And that's where I really discovered I just was fascinated too. So cultivation continuously, but nursery collection, R&D, and then providing plants to cultivators that would fit the system I had designed. And I ended up doing far more propagation than I did cultivation, because I was a large scale, you know, plant propagator. So when we talk about risky shit. There's nothing riskier than having 40, 50,000 plants in your space. You get up to 60,000 and you got full death sentence, they're going to hang you in America. At that time, 10,000 was a life sentence in prison. So once you go 10, you get life. You go over 60, they can hang you. And so I was never under those numbers. And I laugh now because everybody's talking about bold and shit. And I laugh and I'm like, you don't even know what bold is. Bold, that was like insane. And when people came and saw what I was doing and they went to the facilities and they realized what they were looking at, it freaked them out because they were like, whoa, this is death. But I didn't, you don't think about it, like when you're walking on the tightrope. Yeah, you don't, when you're walking on the tightrope, you are not thinking about falling or you'll fall. You have to be thinking about what you're doing. And that really was what turned me on, was the sifting through genetics, the ability to look at so many different types of plants and then compare them simultaneously and realize the value of all of them in their context. So it
and you had a
became
type
this
system that worked, that that was kind of fail proof, and that makes you sleep better at night, I think.
Yes. And I also was lucky that the people that I was able to work with, I never chose people based off of like social rank. I chose people based off of human rank. And so I would have, younger cats are similar to my age. And I never told anybody what I did. If you didn't know me in business, you didn't know what I did. I was a stone. You weren't getting any info. You were never coming to my spot. I never showed a grow. I never took people into my life. My background as a kid in New England had prepared me for this world of really isolation. So like, you have a girlfriend and stuff. She doesn't know what the fuck you do. She has no clue what you do. None of them did. No one had any clue what I really did. So you're living this perpetual lie. I had to create a contractor business to pretend I was a contractor, but it also let me write off all the expenses on the businesses on my taxes. So I would be able to write off all the grow expenses as if they were construction projects. And so, you're maintaining this level of normality when in actuality, you're about as abnormal as it gets.
Yeah.
And, it fit me. And it allowed me to be able to be involved in a million people's lives, because nobody, typically in the cultivation world, you're a silo. You access some genes, you grow your product, your family helps you trim it. That's all. You only see that grow. Only thing you see is finished product from other people. What I got to do is I got to be involved in operation after operation after operation, because I would get brought in as the contractor to create it. And then I would help train your employees. And then I would provide you with your genetics. And if you didn't want to do your own nursery, which I could build too, and then show you, I would just be your nursery provider. And so it allowed me to see a world of herb in an era when no one, it was incredible. It changed my whole life. It was the exposure as a kid in New England. Let me see a tremendous variety and assortment from people who are smart. I get into the military. I'm looking at drugs on an international level. Until you see, 40, 50-gallon barrels filled with cocaine, you don't quite catch how much cocaine is being consumed in America. Once you see the drugs at scale, you realize like, oh, I got you. It changes your view. Yeah. I get into the Bay Area. I'm in a hot spot. I get access into the social world of cannabis. I'm messing around with the Mexicans. I'm getting to see bulk coming in from Mexico. I get up to Humboldt. I get to see the Humboldt cultivators. But because I was doing what I did, it allowed me to be around so many people, and they all impacted me. And I would say predominantly in a positive way, because it was the hippies in Humboldt that really let me experience small batch outdoor, biologically driven, small batch indoor, biologically driven, to where I could consume it enough to know that it was better than what I was producing in terms of impact and of quality high.
I don't know anybody who has this full spectrum of expertise, you know what I mean? To be able to not only guide yourself, of course, to your future businesses, but dude, You knew how all the clocks work, how all the gears turn, and I think that's very difficult to have somebody that has this whole spectrum of knowledge to do it as well as you did. You know?
I got very fortunate. It was funny too, because, you know, like, I'm very fortunate, but you fight in cases, and you're in the world of illicit drug business. But it fit me, and it fit my dream of diving into this world. My fascination as a 12-year-old never left. I'm 57. I'm still basically 12. I'm still riveted and fascinated by cannabis. And so most people in their lives never get to really explore their desires. And I think that's why they get old and die prematurely, is that you lose your dream. You have to give up your dream to go do what's needed. And I was able to kind of do both. I was able to do what was needed, but I never let go of the dream. And the dream is what allowed me to constantly keep looking and digging and diving, because I wasn't competing or comparing with anybody. It was just really me and the plant, me and the system, me and the understanding. And I think I carried that forward into my legal career, you know? So like, I get into legal cannabis probably like 2007. And I take over an operation, one of the oldest operations in the country, as cultivation director, because they were going bankrupt. They were just failing. And when I got in, I realized it wasn't just the cultivation that was wrong. It was the approach with the people. And what it did is it allowed me to take over the operation in a more complete manner than just the cultivation, but as an operational. And that first year that I was at that facility, the Humboldt Patient Resource Center, we took dispensary in Northern California. So at the time, there was like, 20,000 dispensaries in California in total. So at least, 8,000 dispensaries we were competing against. I didn't even know there was a competition. I didn't even know. I'm not even paying attention to this shit. I'm just doing my job, right? And we win this award, and I'm all happy. And I'm like, hey, look, we just won this award, best dispensary in Northern California. And at the awards, I say, I didn't even know there was an award. And I was so happy. And so people started being smart about it, saying, well, then it was lucky. You were lucky that you won because you didn't know. And I was pissed, because I was like, no, this was not luck. This was hard work. This was me and a team of people who turned the business around and exploded it. And so I said, now that I know there's a competition, you'll see me here again next year. And we won it again. So I did a back-to-back. 2 years in a row, we took that award. And after the second year, I didn't really care about the award, because the awards never matter to me. What at the end of the day, what matters is that the people that you serve are happy with what you're doing, and the people who work for you get paid, and you're happy with the way it's going for you. So, I mean, to me, that's really what matters more than any accolade. It's the fact that you can survive and be consistently functional over time. Like, that's about as a big award as you can get in life. It's kind of the same thing with me with friends. If you got friends that you've known 30, 40 years, if you're not having to change your phone number every 15 minutes because you're screwing somebody, to me, that's the defining features of like decent, because you're able to maintain relationships. You're not having to hide from people. It just shows that you're trying to do your best to be decent. And there's always going to be ups and downs and failures and successes. But when you add it all up at the end of the day, what matters is you were trying to be cool. And that was really what we tried to do at that facility. And it was very successful. And I was bummed too, because I didn't really want to leave that facility. I was happy with what we did. I liked doing what I did. I didn't really want to be the owner of it. In my mind, I'm like a field general. I just want to run the troops. I want to run the campaign. I call it, I want to wage the war. But I'm not really interested in who's wearing the hat. I just like the campaign. But the owner and the staff that had brought me in, they were ecstatic that we had made so much money for them and we had done well, but we had differences of direction on where we wanted to go. And so I was kind of unsatisfied with the direction. And there was an opportunity for me to take over a failing facility in Southern Humboldt. And I took over that facility, and that was called Grass at the time. And I renamed it Wonderland Nursery. But that was the first nursery in the United States that was a true 365 nursery, where it wasn't like we sold clones on the side. No, we sold clones. And then we also brought in
perfect segue, Kev. Perfect segue.
We brought in concentrates. And so Wonderland becomes this place where all of a sudden you could access genetics at scale that were really good. And what we did was we made them affordable
and clean.
Yeah, it was and it was a tough one too, because we didn't use any pesticides, any fungicides. So there was a learning process. And so you make mistakes, people call you moron, but you have to learn somewhere. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to make sure that everything that we were doing was able to be used by people who had immune compromised systems. And so being in medical cannabis changed me, because it made me understand who really buys cannabis from a dispensary. And it's people that don't have access, that have medical need. And when you start to see these people that are financially struggling and struggling in health, the worst thing that you can do is take advantage of them and fuck them. And so for us, that wasn't ever the plan. And I was grateful that I had already been a hustler before I got into medical cannabis, because I didn't see medical cannabis as where I was going to make my money. I saw it whereas I was going to be able to continue my future. I actually lost money. Getting into medical cannabis took money from me, because I was making 5 times more cash in the grind than I ever was at running any facility. But I knew that our future was going to end at some point, because I asked myself some questions like, what is the future going to look like? And I realized that once cannabis became normalized, it would bring investment in. Investment brings talent. And it's impossible to compete with investment and talent at the same time. Yes, you can't. It goes to sleep. You can't sleep. It's kind of like fucking with law enforcement. They go to bed at night, so they can tear your life up, but they go home and go to bed. At night, you got to figure out how you're going to fight the case. Yep. So you never get any rest. And so they basically wear you down. It's like a war of attrition. And that's what legal cannabis was going to be to me, was a war of attrition. And so I realized I had to get into legal cannabis so that I'd be able to understand the world of legal cannabis, so that I'd be able to figure out where's my path, because I didn't want to be obsolete. And I knew that the rest of the world, there really was no place for someone like me. What do you do when you've been able to do your own thing your whole life? Like, where are you going to go work? Who are you really going to go work for when it's, there's a dress code and there's you have to go punch a little stamp, and
it's, are you kidding? No way.
Fucking nightmare. Yeah, no, it's horrible. And most people have to live that shit. And that's the tragedy, that they put you into this machine and they basically break you down emotionally and spiritually. So you're a robot. And that's what the world wants, is human robots to do the job, shut up, go home, come back the next day. We'll give you a couple days off a year. We'll give you a nickel more every couple years for a raise.
Hey, 1 more week to the paycheck.
Yep, if there's any kind of struggle, you get cut. I mean, I was like, that's not what I'm seeking. And herb allowed me to have so much more freedom. And I just said, whoa, I was 40 at that time. And I was like, 40, 41 when I made this realization that, like, holy shit, by the time I'm 60, I won't have a future. And I'm 57. And so I was really accurate on my prediction. And I just started to work towards the goal of trying to understand the system, just like I tried to understand the plant. And so the understanding of the plant, the process of understanding cultivation methodologies, understanding storage, understanding processing, understanding transport, understanding how to launder money, all of those processes I had to figure out. I figured I could repeat it in cannabis if I had enough head start. So if I said, if I get in right now, when there's this opportunity to take over this facility, then it'll be at the right level to allow me to be able to see if I can take my methodology of functioning and apply it and see if it works. And it did.
Was that before you got your place in Humboldt also, or?
No, this was when I left the HPRC. That would have been 2013, right? 2013, I leave the HPRC. We begin Wonderland, and I pick up Wonderland. I pick up Port Royal, the farm. We were already using it as an operation, but I purchase it. I start the original Ganjier. We come up with the Golden Tarp Awards. So like there was this moment where in 1 year, I created an entire cornucopia of cannabis entities to see what happens if I throw it all at the wall.
We're going to talk about Port Royal next.
Yeah.
And of course, we're going to talk about the Ganjier project, which is fantastic. So about Port Royal, I saw a couple of videos that you posted on YouTube, and just the attention to detail and the whole, you know, it's kind of like you asked the mountain how she wanted for you to plant and
develop it.
Yeah, it was so beautiful. Congratulations, Boom.
Thank you. What was cool about it was that when I get in touch with the original owner of it, it was really as a caretaker. I had a ranch that I had leased from him, and he didn't live in the area. And he said, "Hey, could you just check on my property once in a while?" And so I check on the property, and then he says, "Hey, if you want to light it up, you can light it up. You know, you can throw me some cake and light it up." And the cannabis came out phenomenal. Just the quality of the flower coming off that hill back in the day. And that would have been like, you know, 207 time was the first time I probably sparked it up. And I couldn't get over the quality. And I ended up bumping into another guy that I know that was old. And he talked about the quality of the herb that came off that exact hill 20 years earlier when the family used to run it. And he was talking about how good the pot was that came off of the hill then. And it just made me realize that there was some microclimate on that location that really made cannabis grease up. So yeah, I never got the yield numbers that I got off of my lower elevation properties, but I never had product as good as that came off of that farm. It was stunning, stunning product. And so I knew in the future that our only future in these small regions would be in like hyper craft, because once we got into true commercial cannabis, we're going to be talking 1,000 acre, 10,000 acre scale. And the mountains don't lend itself to that. And the last thing I want to do is clear cut a whole mountain to the, you know, top to bottom so I can grow on it. So I just knew that Humboldt County, Mendo, Trinity, Santa Cruz, parts of SoCal, we were Sierras, Grass Valley. We were going to be forced to grow in these smaller microclimate, micro patch size operations. And I just realized that hill did that. It had a unique impact on the cannabis. And so I said, well, let me design a garden that replicates what I think the future needs to be, which is not just cannabis wall to wall, but cannabis in a more elegant way. And I took a look at Tuscany, Italy as the model. And I said in Tuscany, because they were wealthy, the grape didn't roll right up to your front door. You had the villa, and the grape was in these, I would say, more visually attractive formations. And I said, that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to be able to take the hill and then create it to where it's not just pot, but it's pot in a visual manner where it blends in with the mountain. And if I use the mountain correctly, it'll give me different microclimates with which I can then accentuate different varieties so that I'm not just having one impact on one thing. I'm able to have the upper deck. I have the south benches, I have the west bench, and then I have the bench in the back that's shielded from the wind. So I get incredible wind, I get incredible sun, and then I get good sun and buffered wind. So it allows me to be able to kind of optimize what I wanted to grow and be able to have the optimal conditions for different types of plants. Because once you do the R&D, you figure out what likes what area. And I just thought that as I got old, I would slowly be able to develop it. And that's kind of where you get into the beginning of like regenerative ag, because I didn't have any background in it. And so I started to realize, okay, let's build the farm and let's try to monetize it. And so I didn't go into the ground at first, in bag, but it was all biologically done. So everything is the only thing I add to any of these bags once I build them is water and some compost tea to get my biology moving. But the plan over time, and which we were able to achieve, like in the back, is piece by piece, we start to be able to get the soilless media that I use is now connected to the soil that I'm on. So that now we can start really sharing the microbial herd, and we can start getting the impact of the region into the plant. But, and it's funny because when you start a project, it takes time, and I didn't put all my effort into the farm. And I put my effort into the dispensaries, the nurseries, the operations, the education, the programs. I spread myself out like liquid butter, because I was afraid that any one entity could fail. I had no faith in the legal system in any way. I said, this is going to be a nightmare. And if you put all your weight in one room, you're so dependent on that one room that if it collapses, your whole world collapses. And people didn't understand what I was doing. And it was funny because people thought I was greedy, going after so many licenses and so many different operations, but it wasn't. It was purely that I didn't have any faith that anything was going to work.
I'm trying to see what's going to fail and have a plan B for it.
I needed plan D through Z. You know what I mean? I put a lot of plans together, and it was just really based on the fact that I knew I wasn't in control, and I knew that the world was going to be an absolute disaster once we had the government involved in our lives. Yeah. And so it's you have to kind of look at it like, first I did the construction on the farm, where I was able to get the benches cut and shaped, and we're allowed to do a 3-acre agricultural conversion on our timber production zone land. So I was able to take that 3-acre portion of my farm that had the least amount of lumber and had the best exposure, and turn that into a farm, and then allow everything to naturally kind of re-veg back over. So all the native grasses came back, all the native components returned, so that what we have now is back to like a living mountain.
Yeah.
And that was it was incredible. And so I shut it down the last couple of years, where I just kept my license, but I let it sit fallow, because the market in California was you're having to sell below cost. And so there's no way I can give the farm 800 hours of my life and then not make any money. So it's better to lose the money on the farm license and not burn out as a farmer than it is to burn out as a farmer and then sell your farm because you're discouraged. So now the prices have returned, things are coming into an upswing. I'll light my farm up this year, and we'll go back into production.
Yes.
So I'm ecstatic, because at the end of the day, that's really what I like to do most. I love nursery work, but I did so much of it for so long, and Wonderland was so unique in its aspect. And it got me an incredible amount of attention, and it gave me a lot of experience, which led me to be able to create the Cookies R&D facility. So my work with Wonderland brought me to an attention level that allowed a major brand to say, hey, would you be our nursery provider? And then over the course of time, would you be the full R&D facility? And so I was able to create the R&D facility for that company.
And just one thing, Kev, I want to explain to the younger cats that are watching or listening to us. Guys, most of the genetics that you purchase either from Barcelona or Amsterdam, the European, I'm not saying it's all of it, and I'm not going to mention names, but Kevin has a hard hand on it. Most of that stuff came from Kevin. Am I wrong?
Well, a lot of killer shit did. We used to have a lot of people. The thing was that we were different, is that Wonderland, you got to remember that, like, I wasn't from the legal world, right? So when we ran Wonderland, we had a very different approach to dealing with people, and it allowed me to deal with a lot of internationals. And what we were able to do is put a lot of internationals into gene packages that we knew were phenomenal, that were going to work. And what it did is it allowed us to populate countries all over the world with genetics, and CBD genetics as well too. We released all the original CBD genes into the world, but I did the CBD for free. So I released, hundreds of thousands of CBD plants for free when no one even knew what to do with it, really. And it kind of kick-started the CBD revolution to that degree, because AC/DC was developed at the HPRC, and I wasn't the developer. It was just I let them use my facility, but I was able to be part of the project, and it let me understand the impact of non-psychoactive genes. And I realized that if we could get non-psychoactive genes into the world, we would start to get this different communication between people who wanted psychoactive and non-psychoactive usage. And so they'd all understand it's all cannabis, so that people who want stimulation mentally are not in any way less needy than those that have body pain or have depression or whatever issue it is you're facing. We're all one population. And my goal was to do that, but I funded all of that. So we funded that entire production and population movement through CBD. And it worked. It absolutely transformed the world in the way it did. But I approached regular genes the same way, where I believe that everybody should have access to good genetics. I don't think that there should be this gatekeeper shit to where only, you know, the special royal ones get a hold of good genes. That at the end of the day, you really don't know who anybody is going to be 10 years from now. And so exactly. the irony is we do all this work with all these people that nobody considered valuable, and no one could understand what I was doing. They're like, you're giving some of the best genes ever discovered to regular people. And I'm like, exactly, because they're people. They deserve access just like you and I. Well, what happened was so many of those people ended up growing up into very intelligent, successful people in the cannabis world. And it came back to me a millionfold, to where you become a foundation block in someone's career and you don't even remember them, but they remember you. They remember that when I came to you with need, you were good to me. And 10 years, 15 years later, they contact you online and say, I'm running an operation that's massive. I just needed to let you know, when I had nothing, you were the only one that helped me. And it just makes you feel fulfilled in a human way, because it allows you to be part of our cannabis community. And it was how I saw Azel. It was how I saw the friends that I had as a kid in New England.
Yeah.
It was all connected. It was this, I got to really take the lessons I had learned from all these people that had been very powerful and influential in my life.
And all this shit
to perpetuate
through you now, Kev. That's why we're doing this right now. I'm sorry to interrupt you again,
okay.
but dude, when I started to hear you talk and watch your seminars and classes, I said, there's nobody that has this view, this intention of sharing the stuff, of being completely honest. And that's why I'm trying to bring this to everybody here in Brazil, because I think we're 10 years apart from you guys, behind you guys. I know that we are going to go green. I know what's going to happen, because I seen what happens there after it got legalized. And if you don't work, unfortunately, I have to say this, but in America, if you don't work with a small share on the black market, is very difficult to stay afloat. If you're working a young entrepreneur in cannabis today in America.
Oh, without a doubt, it's a bloodbath for most. And what people have to understand, though, is that your skills have to be developed. You have to develop your craft. So you have to be good at what you do. And you also need to look at the people around you, not as competitors, but as collaborators, because the real competitors are going to come in and they're going to be strangers. They're going to be venture capital groups that are taking money from people all over the world, and they put a fund together. And that fund creates basically a giant Hulk fist that smashes the shit out of everybody that it goes against. And the only way that you can really survive that beating is to form, loosely structured groups of support. And to me, it's the key of cannabis historically, where even in Pakistan, I'm in Pakistan on an exploration, and I'm talking to all the villages that we're collecting and you know, looking at their products, and I'm asking them, what's your policy with genetics? Do you hold your genes in proprietary form? Like, how do you go about it? And they say, oh no, we always share the best genes with each other. Each village exchanges genes. We share genes. It allows us the greatest survivability. And so historically, this has been an approach. The illegality of cannabis created this hoarding mentality, this idea that there's not enough and that we need to have all of it, and that there's so little that I need to let you die so I can have more. Well, that shit's not real. That's a construct. That's a fucking vision created by the world around us so that you don't have human unity. And to me, I think that's really what they wanted, to get rid of hemp, the product, because it competed on an industrial level. But they needed to get rid of cannabis as well, because that competes on a spiritual level. The more I worked in different countries, the more places I go, the more people I deal with, the more I understand that historically cannabis has been this golden thread that's woven societies together in all these incredible ways, as a food source, as a medicine, as a spiritual aid, as a fiber for clothing. It did everything. And what we've done is we've criminalized it and then like bastardized it, so that anyone who touches it is considered, you know, dirty, inferior, less quality, less rank, less intelligent, when really cannabis was woven through any society that touched it, utilized it. And the drug war destroyed that history, and they removed it from history with revisionist history, which is constant. Every time you turn around, we had someone that, you know, I said something about his historical context, and someone from Europe said, well, that's wrong, and you need to go back to school. And I said, no, that's the problem. I don't need to go back to school. That's what I was taught in school. So my school taught me this view. Your school taught you that view, because we're talking about a European figure. You put him on a platform because he's yours. We minimize him because he's not ours. We do the same thing. If it's an American, you put him up. If it's anybody else, you bring him down. And over the course of time, that becomes your reality. And that's
then nobody knows when they leave college, why don't they getting $15 an hour on, you know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a scam. You've educated them, but the problem is that anybody who does anything that isn't business or tech is considered an idiot. Because why would you want to get an education in history? Why would you want an education in sociology? Why would you want an education in anything other than STEM? Because that's where your interests lie, and there's a value. But we don't see it as that. We see education as a path to making money, not as a path of understanding. And what it does is it skews it so heavily. And then once we start to change and revise the truth of the story, pretty soon you don't know what the root of it really was. And the deeper I go into cannabis, the more I understand how woven this thread was. And it helps me understand why the war on drugs was so unbelievably aggressive.